Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for Terryl Whitlatch's presentation, Designing Creaturely Creatures That We Can Believe in. Before we begin, I'd like to begin by acknowledging with honor and respect the indigenous nations on whose traditional territories the university now stands, and whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. We also acknowledge the elders, past and present, including MSU's current Council of Elders, and humbly ask for their guidance. The Valley of the Flowers has been and remains a place of learning for Native American peoples who for millennia have passed ways of knowing, being, and doing from one generation to the next. While land acknowledgement is not enough, it is an important social justice and decolonialization practice that promotes Indigenous visibility and is a reminder that we are all on settled Indigenous land. And it's now my great pleasure to introduce our speaker. Terryl Whitlatch was born in Oakland, California, and started drawing at less than 3 years of age, blessed with a mother who was and still is a talented artist, illustrator, and a father who taught biology. Her fascination with animals started early. Countless weekends were spent visiting zoos, aquariums, and museums. Her father was constantly bringing home chicken hatchlings. Horses were a part of her life. Taught at a horse ranch and paid for years of riding lessons. Most of Terrell's formal education was in the sciences rather than in art, vertebrate zoology to be specific. California Arts and the Academy of Art University, Terrell began a career that has spanned over 25 years. She's worked with major studios and effects houses at the high design, Industrial Light and Magic, Lucasfilm Ltd, Pixar, Walt Disney Feature Animation, Disney Imagineering, PDI, Entertainment Arts, Lucas Arts, Paramount, Edios, Electronic Arts, Wizard, Chronicle Books, Titan Books, Design Studio Press, Imagination International, and many more. She's also the instructor for Creature Anatomy for the online conceptual art school, Schoolism, a lecturer and consultant in animal anatomy. Terrell acted as principal creature designer for Star Wars: The Phantom Menace, the alien creatures and characters, from concept to fully realized anatomies and stylizations. Some significant characters include Jar Jar Binks, Sebulba, the pod racers, the undersea monsters of Naboo, and the Naboo swamp creatures. She also worked closely with George Lucas in redesign of such pre-existing creatures as Jabba the Hutt and the Dewbacks. For Disney feature animation's Brother Bear, she designed Bear, Moo, and other animal characters, from highly realistic anatomical studies to be fully branded characters. Feature films which she has contributed concept art include John Carter of Mars, Dragonheart, Men in Black, Jumanji, Pixar's Brave, which is one of my favorite movies, Century Studios, and Call of the Wild. She's the creator and illustrator of 5 books: The Wildlife of Star Wars, A Field Guide, Carturan Odyssey, Animals Real and Imagined, Science of Creature Design, and Principles of Creature Design. She also contributed illustrations to Lucasfilm's Jedi Path and Book of the Sith, the 4th book by paleontologist Michael Habib, Flying Monsters, Designing Vertebrate, to be released in 2021. Her passion for love of animal life and portrayal of all species, best she can. Rider when not on the drawing board, she's in the saddle working on dressage. And Terrell, it is my pleasure to turn it over to you now.
Well, thank you so much, Atticus, and it's my pleasure to be here. And so I'm just going to be sharing some images about creature design, what it's like to do creature design, and I'm really happy also at the end of that to take any questions that you guys might have. So let me go ahead, and I guess I need to share my screen. Let's see here. Hopefully I'll do this correctly. And I'll do that, and then I'm going to let me just open up the PowerPoint over here. I'll share my screen again. Let's see, here we go, screen 1. Can you see? Can you see my screen?
Yep, we can see your screen.
I'm going to put it into, come on. There we go. Can you see it?
Yep, looks perfect. All set.
Okay, wonderful. All right, so let's talk about creating creatures that characters we can really believe in. So we need to go understand anatomy, but then we have to go beyond it to put life into our creatures. And I'll just kind of be doing back and forth about this. So we talk about duality, and duality is the sum of animal and human personality through observation into one designed body to fulfill its role in the world and story. So we are trying to imagine what it's like to be an imaginary creature or a real creature, but yet we're human beings. We're trying to create a balance in that in order to design something that the audience can relate to. And so anyway, if we can do that, this will achieve a fully integrated character that reflects real life, no matter how weird it looks. Like, for example, animals that appear in The Incredibles or Up. And animals really don't look like those funny looking birds, but yet we almost come to believe in them. So, and that really helps you go on with the story and enjoy the viewing experience. All right, so let's get started with something we know. We, as human beings, we know ourselves probably the best. And this is just a basic breakdown of the anatomy of a typical human being. But I'm going to create some imaginary animals or imaginary creatures. Satyrs are fun to do. They are traditionally half person and half goat, but that's kind of a chimera. So let's try to create something that might be a believable creature. So we look at goats. Here is a nanny goat, and we can see there's basic anatomy there, and there's a lot in common, as it is a mammal, with that of a human being. We all kind of are related to one another as mammals. And I can come up with a character that looks like this. We can see, let's see, we just move this over here. We can see that I've blended human anatomy and goat anatomy, but I haven't created a chimera. I haven't created a Frankensteinian creature that's, say, half goat from the waist down and a fully realized person from the waist up. I have blended that together. So there's a little bit of humanity in the skull and a little bit of goat in the arms, and we go on, and then we add some humor, and this animal really enjoys drinking wine, as most satyrs traditionally do like to do. So it's kind of a fun thing. Oops, let me go over here. Oops, sorry. All right. And then here's some of my sketches from various zoos. Here are some primates. I've done some bonobos and chimps on the left, and then some little squirrel monkeys over here on the right, because I just think they're all so darn cute, and I like to draw them. And then here's one of my formal studies of an African monkey, a Mona monkey. And then here is some studies of a chimpanzee, from the skeleton, its basic surface musculature, and here's the surface of the animal. And so I'm going to create a satyr from those templates. And I come up with something like this. So we have some chimpanzee-ish, and we have ibex. And I've gone really over the top with the ibex horns and made them even more ibexy than is actual in real life, and added kind of some goat-like features in the hands and feet. And we get an imaginary creature that has its own DNA, that's not half something this and half something that, but it exists on its own terms. And that's the key to reading creatures, especially in a sci-fi context. If you're dealing with a purely magical world, then of course you can do, chimeras and such. For example, in The Little Mermaid, Ariel is a chimera. She's basically half fish and half 14-year-old girl. And let's put this animal in its natural environment. Here we go. So here is that particular tree-dwelling satyr in his natural jungle environment. And I've created some imaginary birds inspired by Archaeopteryx and some hornbills. Now, so with some design work that I did from Star Wars, and for the remastered version of Star Wars for episode 6, where we get into Jabba's palace.
Regular
Myself.
Oh, really?
I think we're getting a little bit of reverb. I designed what was called, a lot of what was called Jabba cuties. And basically there were the dancing girls that were in the remastered version of episode 6. And so a couple of examples of Jabba cuties. This one is more of costume design, but this one is a digital character. This little fan dancer. All right. So here are some of my designs for the Phantom Menace. We have Jabba's parents. This is Frank with 2 Ks, the Hutt. This is his father. If you watch the episode 1 very carefully during the pod racer sequence, you'll see these 2 characters make cameo appearances. This is Gardula. This is Jabba's mother. This is, I couldn't resist this. This is Jabba as a little baby Hutt, up to no good. And here we go. So for another client, I was asked, can I design a Hutt-like character that's possibly even worse and even uglier than the Hutt? So this is one of my best shot for that. This is Orem the Ogbog. He's just really a terrible person. He doesn't have too many redeeming qualities. His species are out to rule and take over the world that they live on, and he looks kind of the part. But I was inspired by groupers and anglerfish and cane toads and Triceratops with that big neck frill, and Suriname toads, the females of which lay eggs out of their skin, and it's pretty interesting. So he was really inspired by all kinds of animals from our world. Here are some little conceptual sketches of Orem and his queen, who's actually the true ruler of everything, Domissa. This is Domissa. And Domissa has a little pet. And it's this little tiny, cute little pet. And she, even though she's basically evil, she does have couple redeeming qualities in that she just loves this little pet, which is called a plusha. It just happens that the plusha is, as cute as it is the most poisonous creature on the planet. So I guess that's kind of funny. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at Domissa. There's Domissa. And she's basically like the queen of an ant colony or a bee colony or a termite colony, and that she's constantly giving birth, and her children pop out of her skin. And there's a lot of mucus, as you can imagine. It doesn't hurt her at all. It's kind of just normal. But this is Domissa, and here's her little glass of wine that she's always imbibing. I also, for this particular client, designed some adult coloring books based on this series. And so this is a very complex illustration, but I go ahead and filled in some of the colors so you can see the characters. And there's Domissa, there's the little plusha, and here is Orem and various slaves and such. And of course, if you're up to no good for too long, your subjects eventually turn on you. And this is what's happening here in this illustration from the coloring book. And we've got these very, very fierce animals called trackers, and they're running after these ogbogs and such. Okay, so I do a lot of paleontological reconstruction as well. That's like if you're trying to imagine what a prehistoric animal that actually existed on our planet looked like. Like, what did this particular Brontosaurus look like based on the skeletal evidence that has been recovered? So this is where we are considering anatomy in context to the environment. And was this animal a prey animal or a predator? all that ecology comes into play. Here is a Diplocalis. This was a fairly good size, not the biggest, but a fairly decent sized prehistoric amphibian that lived millions of years before the first dinosaur ever existed. This is called the Diplocalis, and it's very interesting in that it has these horn-like extensions off the parietal bones of its skull. And here is the skeleton. Fortunately, there's quite a few preserved skeletons to work off of. Usually in paleontology, we're not that lucky. We have more like bone fragments or portions of skeletons. And based on using the anatomies of its closest living ancestors, which are basically newts and salamanders, I did the reconstruction and by hanging the muscles on the bones. And then from there, I speculated as to its surface texture, of its skin, the colors, all of that sort of thing. I love doing paleo reconstruction. And here are some of my studies. Here's a red-spotted newt, and I had some of these animals as pets when I was a child, so I know them pretty well. And then here is a Japanese hellbender, one of the largest amphibians. And here's an axolotl. These guys still have gills. And this is what the top view of the Diplocalis looks like. And then here is it coming towards us. Here it is in the same position and pose, inspired by the red-spotted newt. And then down here is where I can make a creative jump. I have all this real-life information, and here I can design an animatable character. This would be something typical that you would see in Western-style animation. And then this little guy here is kind of like a little chibi that you might see in a cute little manga production. But it's basically the same animal based on reality. And that's how Disney works, and that's how Disney and DreamWorks worked as well. They go from what's real to stylized in their creature design. And so based on the Diplocalis, I decided I wanted to have a little fun, and I created kind of a humorous creature based on that actual animal. And I went over the top. I really extended the horn-like structures. And I thought, what the heck? Let's add another pair on the tail. And I gave it a kind of a big underbite here, and just kind of had some fun. And so I just calling it the Diplo Blub. And here is the Diplo Blub in an action scene. And yes, I promise you, it escapes from these predators here, which are kind of a combination of various felines and salamanders and all as well. But it's really, really fun. When you're basing things on nature, nature gives you an anchor to really play to your heart's content. And here's another example. I mean, I went from a pretty realistic looking creature to a really stylized one. So creature design is way cool. It really allows you to play. Okay, so, you guys are right up there, getting your dinosaur country and such. And here is having fun with Triceratops. And, we all know that Triceratops in their spare times, they just love to play football and work out and such. But I was doing these little sketches just about when the first Avenger movies were coming out. And I thought, well, the Avengers, they're really popular. Dinosaurs are always popular. So what would happen if you brought those two ideas together? And I did, and at that time, these particular images I'm going to show you went viral on the internet. I didn't make any money off that. It was just for fun, and it wouldn't have been cool because the Avengers belong to Marvel. But if you do it for free, it's fine. That goes under the category of fan art. So here we go. So I'm doing the Incredible Hulkasaurus. So here's the Incredible Hulkasaurus. This is what he looks like before the gamma rays hit him. He's this, this little unassuming anole lizard, working for the US Navy somewhere in Pensacola. And then this is after the gamma rays. And so he's really buff, and he's really musculature, but the only problem is as buff and as muscular as he is, he still can't scratch his chin, so he still has that problem. All right, so going back to paleontology, here is Protoceratops, one of the species of Protoceratops. And at least up to the most recent information we have on it, we think that it had some feather-like quills on its tail. Here's its cub down here, little baby. And then when you have that anatomy and that information, then you can play with it. You do a little painting of this little Protoceratops. And obviously he's very anthropomorphized. It's like a Protoceratops that is acting like a person. And that's where you get anthropomorphism. Because as human beings, we see animals through a human filter. Or we tend to most of the time. And this is the same case with a Triceratops. There are some animation cells I did of a Triceratops flinging flowers around. We all know that real Triceratops don't do that, but we're blending it with a whole lot of anthropomorphism. And that's where we're going to segue right here into a production that is a more naturalistic production. This will be, I'll use Brother Bear as an example, and then my own book, The Katuran Odyssey. So when I was hired by Disney to work on Brother Bear, one of the first things they had me do for their animation department was to do a whole lot of model sheets showing the anatomy of actual bears, because the animators needed to understand the anatomy in order to draw and animate these animals in a naturalistic manner. So here is the actual Kodiak bear. Here is what the surface musculature looks like. And then I've simplified how the fur blocks and the fur tracks lay. Because when you're animating in 2D animation, things that are furry, you have to move the fur in blocks rather than individually. In Brave, all that fur moves individually due to a very complex software application. And so in 2D animation is basically a series of sequential illustrations drawn by hand, whereby, whereas 3D animation, you basically have a digital character that is rigged with digital vectors. It's more like a marionette that the animator moves. That's a kind of simplistic explanation, but that's kind of gets you the idea. So here are some conceptual illustrations from Brother Bear. I worked for about a year's worth of work for that production. And the animals, Disney wanted me to keep them pretty realistic. And here you can see I'm starting to design a little bit more anthropomorphism. You can see in the eyes. Notice how this bear has eyebrows all of a sudden. Real bears don't have eyebrows, well, at least not like that. But once you start doing that, that's kind of the process you get to, say, Disneyfication or DreamWorksification or Pixarification. In other words, getting close to the more stylized character. So this is just a segue. Here's some of my sketches of birds from my notebooks. You can see how naturalistic they are. And some of them are just squiggles because obviously birds don't hold still for very long. But those came in handy when I designed some characters for Brother Bear. This Raven was supposed to be a main character and she was later dropped, but I had fun designing her anyway. But you can see how much human gesture I'm putting into her. Real ravens don't do this, but people do. And then designing squirrels. So I went from a fairly realistic ground squirrel two ground squirrels that were doing, pretty much human things, especially this. Ground squirrels don't do this. People do. And muskrats might think that that's funny, but they usually don't go up to the ground squirrel and say, hey, that's pretty funny, bro, in nature. Okay, now you can see the process even more as I'm designing that ground squirrel. He's pretty stylized at this point. And the bears are definitely getting closer to the release character of design. Here's another example of a very Disney ground squirrel. And I also did a lot of work on the Moose brothers. I loved those Moose brothers. I love moose anyway. Moose are so cool and prehistoric looking. They're just fantastic animals. And more conceptual work. And here we are starting to work with the script. And down here you can see by then I pretty much gotten those bears to the Disney release production there. And then I worked on a whole bunch of the other animals. Same process, going from the real to the more animatable simplification, but always making sure that anatomy was there. Because in order to animate something, you have to have anatomy. So here is conceptual work from my book, Katuran Odyssey. Katura is basically a planet that's inhabited solely by intelligent talking animals, all kinds of animals. There aren't any people on this planet. There's only animals on this planet. And any animal that ever existed on planet Earth, whether prehistoric or living today, lives on Katura. And some of the main characters are lemurs. And so even though I've used anthropomorphism to tell a story, the animals are able to do certain things according to their physical abilities. For example, lemurs have hands. They can pick up objects like little buckets. And so conceivably in my imaginary world, it wouldn't be beyond the realm of imagination for them to be able to build little houses and depend on these fantastic, huge baobab trees to build cities or villages. This is one of the main characters, Katuk. This is just a character study, and he's just kind of feeling sad. I love drawing lemurs. Here is another character. This is a Hi-Hi. He's a more sinister character in my story. Here are some illustrations getting close to the finish of the book. We have him looking at a story. He's trying to find his way back home. And he's asking help from this Kolobos elder here. But you can see the way his gesture and what he's holding. This is a very human thing to do. And yet this is a very realistic animal doing that. So this is that blend of dualism, putting a human personality within the animal personality and body. It's kind of this this balanced dance. Here's some sketches from my notebooks. I love horses. My favorite animal, anything that resembles a horse, I just am all into. And we have, horses come in many different forms, especially domesticated horses, but there's quite a few interesting wild forms, obviously zebras and wild Asian asses like onagers. The Kiang is a type of onager. And then here is an angry domestic horse with his fierce teeth. And so here, one of the main characters in Katura is Quiga the quagga. The quaggas were a type of zebra that unfortunately in our world were hunted to extinction around the turn of the 20th century. They were very, very beautiful. They were hunted because they were so because of their beautiful skins. Happily, they are the only animal that has been brought back genetically from extinction. You can look up the Quagga Project on the internet and you'll find this out. And even quaggas are now alive again today. And that's a very wonderful success story. The only extinct animal that has truly been brought back from extinction. Let me go back a little bit. Bing, bing. So here we have Pikachu and Quigga and the Desert Spring, the Caricatures Odyssey, and all these ravens and rooks are taunting them. And here is another illustration of Pikachu and Quigga, and there's a little mouse deer called Sia down here. This is actually from the cover of the book. And it's a story of friendship between these two characters. And here's one of the original Photoshop documents. And the text goes down here, but I thought I would just show you without the text. The book was designed like as if it was a movie. This is film aspect ratio that you would see either in the cinema or on your smart television. So it was designed as a film. So let's go back to the galaxy and look at character contrasts. All right, so I had a lot to do with these two characters. I designed these two characters, and they're almost opposites in personality and in physiognomy. Here's Jar Jar Binks, and he was designed to appeal to young children because the next audience growing up at the time for Star Wars were primarily a younger audience than the first series was for. When the episodes 4 through 6 premiered in the 70s and early 80s, most of the audience were like old teenagers and up. But with Phantom Menace, starting with Phantom Menace, a lot of that audience may have been average age 5 years old. And so George Lucas was very cognizant of that. And because in Star Wars, a lot of seriously bad things happen, like people getting blown up or fried or shot or dismembered, little kids needed kind of a safe character that they could say, okay, if Jar Jar makes it, then it's not so bad. And he hooked them in there. And so we have a kind of a friendly character, kind of upbeat, and then he meets Sebulba. Here's Sebulba, who's real sour. He's got a real chip on his shoulder. He doesn't care what happens to his fellow pod racers as long as he wins. If they go to their reward, so to speak, then he's all the better as long as he wins. And so you can see the difference in design. Here is someone that's kind of a lot of round curves, especially in his face, and someone who's just a real sourpuss. By the way, the inspiration for Sebulba was a camel. And I had a lot of fun with that. And even within a species, here's Jar Jar again, and then there's variation. Here's Sergeant Tarkles, world-weary Sergeant Tarkles, who is like, oh, Jar Jar, did you have to do it again type of being. And you can even see in his color, a more Eeyore type blue color, and he's a more sunny, bright. And McDonald's, go into a McDonald's franchise, the colors inside the restaurant, if you notice, are yellow and orange. And so I was just kind of thinking about the color scheme. Color is important in character design. Here are some more aliens that I also did for Lucasfilm. These were some young adult novel paperback covers. And we can see kind of a fierce hero character. And then we can hear some kind of a con artist character. And here's kind of a noble lizard princess character. Now, I've also done a lot of design for video games and such. And a lot of times with video games, they are on a certain budget. And so you can't do a whole lot of variety as far as body types go, but you can play with what you have. So by using color and accessories, you can make different types. Like here is a kind of a hero type, your basic hero type. A lot of times if you associate blue with a character that's like means symbolically a hero. Here's kind of a warrior type. He's a little bit more ruddy, more sanguine in color, and maybe his face is slightly broader. And then we have kind of a sidekick, a more unusual character, and he's kind of got, you know, more splotchy. His ears are different, and you can kind of make variety even if you're on a limited polygon budget, as it were. And you could do the same thing. You can stretch and squash the basic body and still use the same amount of pixels. And here we have kind of maybe an evil type. Maybe we have kind of a jolly, wise type. Here we have a fierce little guy. And I don't know, I just did that for fun. And if you have some money left over in your budget, you can experiment a little bit with more of like that kind of a costuming. In this case, the costuming is almost like part of their bodies. These kind of cat people, I call them cat people. And then you might put some of your budget into a really elaborate costume, like this princess character. But you're still using the basic sort of body structure. All right, so again, I do a lot of scientific illustration. Here is an example. This is leopard anatomy, feline anatomy. Here is an adult female. Here is a cub. It's interesting seeing the difference between a very young animal and the adult. Here are some sketches from my sketchbook of pumas. Here are some more studies of pumas, and here's a domestic hairless cat. Here is a puma for brother bear. This was another character that was eventually dropped, but I had fun with playing around with this puma. He's playing with his skull, the remains of his last meal, in kind of a Shakespearean mode, like, alas, poor York, I knew you well, and you tasted pretty good too. All right, so here are two very different illustrations. This was for a greeting card, dandelion. They're just sitting in the same pose, but here we have a very anthropomorphic lion. Oh, I love you, Mr. Butterfly. Where here, this is an illustration done for a paleontology magazine of Smilodon Fatalis from the La Brea tar pits in Southern California. And he's being mobbed by scrub jays. These animals lived together at the time. Here's California poppies, and he's acting in a very naturalistic manner. This is totally on the animal's terms. This is more on people terms. Here are some studies of canines. Here's a young fox. And in contrast, still a canine, is a pug, this little pug puppy. But I find it interesting, being an anatomist, of contrasting, comparing a wild canines built to survive in the wild anatomy and one that has basically been re-engineered to be a little lap pet for human beings. Here's an illustration from a child's book. Penny Penny. Here's Foxy Loxy. I own these two specimens. I have a number of animal specimens and taxidermed birds and skulls and such. And so these are real seahorses. This is the female here. This is the male here. But this is a bookmark design. And I think these animals have some basis in reality, but I think I was thinking about the goldfish sequence in Disney's Fantasia when I did this one. All right, real study of a crocodile, and then a corporate advertisement for Crocs. So here is a croc wearing Crocs. Greeting card. A giant panda and a red panda. Obviously, they don't do this in the wild, but the anatomy that I've learned, animal anatomy, has helped me be able to portray these animals and then to play. So the anatomy is an anchor to allow me to do things like this. The same thing for this little green card. He's dressed to kill, this little guy, this little kestrel. And for cartoon series, these are fun. These are like the bad bird gang, and they have laser guns. So always give your pet cockatiel or your pet budgie the best of care, or they might come at you with little laser guns. Like, give me that bird seed, and I mean it now. All right, so designing a real world griffin, I used feline anatomy from that study I did earlier, and then anatomy from that Protoceratops dinosaur that I showed you earlier, kind of blended them together and then exaggerated even a little bit more to kind of create a griffin. This is interesting because when ancient peoples first discovered Protoceratops skulls in the Middle East, they actually thought those were the skulls of griffins, and that's how the legend came to be. And for those that don't know, a griffin in ancient history, ancient mythology, is an animal that is the front part's an eagle and the back part's a lion. Here are those griffins in a natural context. And this is based on, footage of lion kills and how lions interact. And here's some scavengers too. Here is a study of that griffin. This particular griffin is called a T-zor. And once you have the anatomy under your belt, you can play. Yes, this would be like a design for a digital character. And then simplifying it more, this would be for a 2D animated character. And this is just having fun. And this is having fun. And, oops, sorry. So I love Dr. Seuss. One of my favorite characters is the Zans from, what was it? Is it one fish, two fish, three fish, blue fish, I think? And so I thought, what would that animal be if it was a real animal? And so the closest I could come to as far as what exists on our planet were like a wildebeest, or maybe a hartebeest. These two animals are in the same antelope group. So I thought, I'm going to play with that idea. And so I made the Zans realistic, and then I played around with the wildebeest to make him less realistic. And then here is my 2D animated style, really fantastical Dr. Seussian Zans. Oh, and by the way, this is, I just had to do, this is like Mrs. Jar Jar Binks. So he married this hot Gungan babe and they lived happily ever after. So here is another illustration from the Catern Odyssey. So here is another wildebeest. I just love them because they're real animals, but they look like they shouldn't be. They're just crazy looking antelope. And so there's sitting here in the Catern version of a tiki bar. And taking that idea of happy animals that have stayed in the tiki bar too long, so much they actually see blowfish swimming by. Here is my tiki wildebeest. All right, here is a character here. This is the Elenix. The Elenix is a bear-like creature about the size of an Asian elephant, but he's basically inspired by the prehistoric short-faced bears of North America. Here they are in character, in conceptual art, in their environment. This is typical what I would do, design for a movie, choose an episode from the film so the director could say, yeah, this is the way we want to go. Here is the close-up of his face. So we have his face here, but you can also do this. This is the same creature, but maybe he would appear like in the Flintstones or something like that, or in a Pixar production. And here's all kinds of things, once you understand anatomy, as I've said, that you can do with a character. You can be really nutty. You can send him to anime conventions if you want to. You can have him advertise cereal and eat cereal and have expressions and be insane. You can do all kinds of things. Here is another character from that same production, Tales of Amalthea. He's a more noble character, a hero character. Here are some of the study sketches I did of him. He's kind of like a Roman warrior. He's got real powerful. He's about as tall as a giraffe. He can whack things with his weapons, with his tail, with his horns. He's pretty strong and undefeatable. But yet with him, likewise, you can have fun and create all kinds of different sorts of stylized characters. This one I just like. He's from that same production, Amalthea. He was inspired by some prehistoric antelope-like creatures, like the Synthechathus. And here are some warriors from Amalthea. And you can do aesthetic designs as well. I've chosen those characters and done some kind of Art Nouveau illustration from the context of a book. So I do all kinds of things, from movies, games, book illustrations, paleo reconstruction, all kinds of things. And that's what makes life fun. There's that flying creature there, kind of a flying greyhound. And here is from Amalthea. This again is that adult coloring book, but let me show you more clarity. There you can see the characters. I've dropped in some color. And I've designed these intentionally in sequence as if they could be animated in flight. And book illustration with aesthetic motifs. There's that same animal, but he looks a little bit more friendly. Okay, caricatures. I was talking with Atticus a little bit earlier about caricatures. That's adding another layer. So we've layered in human personalities already in our characters and our creatures. We've layered in the natural world from the actual animals. But what if the character is also a caricature of an existing person? That's a real challenge. It's a fun challenge, but it can be a real challenge. So let's talk about that. One of the best examples is from Disney's Jungle Book. Here's Shere Khan. He was voiced by George Saunders. If you look at Shere Khan's face is a caricature of George Saunders. And in the production, George Saunders is basically playing himself, but yet he comes across very well as a tiger as well. So that's a beautiful balance of caricature, preserving both the natural world of being a tiger, but yet you are still a caricature of the actor. So let's choose another example, one that I did. Some of you may be familiar with the 1960s, very popular daytime drama, Dark Shadows, was full of vampires and scary things and terrible things that happen in a huge house in Maine, of course, where scary things always happen in Maine. They're either happening in Maine or they're happening in the Pacific Northwest. Take your choice. So we've got the vampire Barnabas Collins, and we have his wife Angelique, who is this beautiful witch, but she's very evil, and they have kind of this love-hate relationship. And so the question was posited, what if they were animals, but they still had to follow the same script? Uh-oh, what happens? Well, like this might happen. So here we have Angelique doing what she did in this series, one of which was she liked to create voodoo dolls and prick them and causing all kinds of mayhem. Other things that happened in this series is that they would wall people up behind walls and let them rot, basically. And here is Barnabas Collins, but a whole world changes when you, instead of it being Barnabas Collins, it's a Barnabas Collie. And that is a whole lot of fun. So what I tried to do was to preserve the elegance that the actor Jonathan Frid brought to the role. I didn't want to lose that at all. And there needed to be some sort of recognition, like he had these pretty crazy eyebrows and was always very serious and mean. And then, of course, Angelique, she was a very, very beautiful actress, Laura Parker, but she was also adorably evil. And I was trying to preserve that. And we have some of the caricatures of some of the other characters here. So there's Barnabas Collie, the vampire dog. All right. So everything in the kitchen sink and style and aesthetics, I've been kind of talking about this all along. But the integration of duality, you know, animal, person, nature, story is the thing. And in order to, and we do all this to support the story of the movie, so you can get lost in the movie. And the story is the big thing. And that's what Disney said. The story is the thing. If you don't have story, you don't have anything really. And so all the characters you design have to support the story and make the story apparent. So elephants. Here is a basic elephant. Here is its basic anatomy. And with that, you can create all kinds of characters. You can create this character, this kind of Pasha elephant. You can create a fierce warrior elephant. You can also create elephants from outer space that only have one eye and a ray gun. Or you can create Elephas. And he's almost breaking the rules. He barely looks like an elephant at all. That's probably about as far as you can go without breaking the rules. As I mentioned earlier, I really like Dr. Seuss, and this is a little doodle I was doing. I was thinking of a particular illustration from a book I remember from my childhood. It was an ABC book, and that is the illustration. Rosie rah-rah rides a red rhino, and I'm almost done. Here's just some sketches. I have a dragon fox. I have Peter, not a cottontail. I have this little character who's a pig alien. And then, of course, when we had, here's Pikachu realized. When we had Pokemon Go a couple of years ago, that was really popular. I thought, what did he really look like in real life? Probably something like that, like this frazzled chinchilla. Here's all kinds of animals in a putt-putt course scene, all kinds of styles. This was from a job called Cosmic Soda Pop. Bookmarks from that same series. Animation studies of characters from that series. More of those. And more. I'm not lingering because I know that we are running out of time. But all this sort of stuff happens in a animated series. There's a storyboard scene. There's the beatnik characters from Cosmic Soda Pop. It was later called Atomic Soda Pop. And of course, you always have to have Space Tigress. You have mermaids, you have bands, and then here's some more recent characters from Alice in Wonderland. We have a Jabberwocky. Here's the actual Jabberwocky. Cat sketches, more cats, crazy cats, and the little sketches here. And we've got Andy Norwal, Here's the color version. Leopardo and the famous pony Lisa. Meagle antelope. A study for Van Goat. Here are some sketches of swine and little cute little horse from my sketchbooks. Very handy when designing characters like Pegaso. Here's some horse studies, handy for studying characters like horse goddesses. Oops, this is Epona. Epona is the goddess of the horses that the ancient Celts worshipped. And I believe that's the end of my presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That was mind-blowing. That was awesome. So I think since we're close to the hour, I put the link for attendance in the chat. It looks like some people are having some issues with it. That's the link that I know that we have.
Okay.
If it doesn't work for you, keep it and try it again. But for those of you who have a little bit of time to stay, I think we have some time for some questions, because I think there was some pretty good questions in the chat. If you are interested in taking some questions.
I am very happy to take questions.
Wonderful. Kate, do you have one picked out?
Yes. Yeah, thank you everybody for asking such. Can you hear me? I'm sorry, I'm in a kind of a loud area. Can you hear me?
Yep, you're pretty good. Just ask the question and you can mute afterwards.
Okay, yeah. So one of our questions is, what is your creative process for your story? Do you focus on the story first and then the more realistic side follows, or vice versa?
Usually the story comes first. The story establishes what the world is, the boundaries of the world, the personalities of the characters, their role in the story. That's typically what happens. It doesn't always happen. It depends upon, if it's a movie, how much of the script has been written. In the case of Star Wars, the script was kind of being written at the same time we were designing, but we basically knew, and George basically had a good sense of what the worlds were going to look like. And so that was very helpful. As to exactly what the plot turned out, we weren't exactly sure, but as long as the characters matched what he had in mind and the vehicles, the environments, then we could go ahead and proceed. Sometimes we were storyboarding along a certain tact, and then that would change and we would storyboard different boards. I did a fair amount of storyboards as well.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We have another question. This is pretty interesting. When do you know, you mentioned this when you were talking about the elephant, that you said you almost broke the rules with how far you went with Elvis. So when do you know that you've gone too far with the addition of traits to a creature? And would you rather preserve anatomical correctness or world function?
Well, let's see, with Elvis, if I would have to see if I went any further, if he started to look like something else besides an elephant, I know I would have broken it. In other words, I would have broken the elephant of him. It's sort of like if you look at, Tim Burton is marvelous at this with Nightmare Before Christmas. You look, in fact, I was inspired a little bit by Jack Skellington with Elvis. Jack Skellington is basically a skeleton, but he's barely a skeleton. If we went any further, then we would ask, what is that? So when it stops to look at like what you intend for it to be, you want people to say, oh, that's an elephant, even though it's really weird. They can still see an elephant, but if it gets to be where, what is that? Then you know you've broken it. As far as the anatomical integrity goes, that depends a lot on the nature of the production. If it's a really realistic one, like for example, if this is going to be a creature that was going to appear in Star Trek, obviously we'd want it to be as really believable as we could make it. We would, and that would be similar to Star Wars, but probably even more so in Star Trek, because Star Wars has a little bit of leeway. There's a lot of humor in Star Wars. I would say one of the main textural differences between Star Trek and Star Wars is that in Star Wars, you've got that little twinkle, that little bit of humor somewhere, and you can kind of make your sci-fi creatures a little over the top. With Star Trek, that's a more naturalistic viewpoint, and you want a more academic, I would say, more academic approach in Star Trek. And so you'd want to be able to have a more serious approach to your creature design. Star Wars, you can have a little more fun with it.
Cool. We had another question from Sophia, which was, do you tend to use more like digital media, or do you tend to use more like traditional hand-drawn or painting, or sort of a mix of all of them?
I usually will do a mix. I rarely will do a digital from start to finish. Most of the time I'll start out traditionally, and actually my peers, it's creature design, and my peers at least, we tend to start out in paper because we like that visceral feel that traditional tools can give you. There's something that, okay, this just feels alive, and so that translates over. But then you can always scan in your drawing at whatever point into a digital program like Photoshop or Procreate or whatever, and do trick it up or clean it up or make changes here and there. So I tend to work traditionally to trad digitally. Rarely will I do anything from start to finish that's totally digital. The thing with traditional is that there's that chaos factor that can't quite be replicated digitally. You really can't predict how lead is going to spatter on your paper, for example, and everybody's pressure is different. When I do work digitally, I tend to use, say, for example, a self-dulling brush, like a lino crayon, and then that kind of gives me that feel. So if I'm working totally digitally, I'll draw with the lino pencil because that feels like pencil on paper to me. So, that's, and whatever gets the job done by the deadline is fine. Usually with the client, that's all they really care about. Just get the idea to us by this date. Okay.
Yeah. Kate, do you have another question, or shall I go? Okay. Actually, Clarissa, do you want to ask one of your questions?
Yeah, sure. So one of my questions was, how do you decide the coloring for paleontological reconstructions? Like, are there specific animals or like animal groups that you like to use that you feel like would most likely be what dinosaurs could be?
Yeah, dinosaurs are interesting because traditionally artists in the past have painted dinosaurs kind of like the same colors as rhinoceroses or elephants or hippopotamuses, because it's like, okay, if the animal's big, then it must be gray in color. That's not necessarily true, because if you look at a big, huge animal like a giraffe is a pretty colorful animal. And there's certain whales are more colorful than others. But if you look at other reptiles, and largest reptiles, of course, like Komodo dragons and crocodiles and alligators, they tend to be less colorful. But if you look at a whole lot of other reptiles like lizards and such, some of them are beautiful in color, emerald greens and blues and oranges and such. And certainly in birds, and birds are they're actually reptiles. They're all different colors. So with dinosaurs, I kind of tend to take my inspiration from the reptile group as a whole, reptile amphibian group as a whole, and birds, especially the feathered dinosaurs like velociraptors and dinosaurs in the Archaeopteryx group. So that's what I'm doing nowadays. That's the current science anyway, and so I'm just following those most current theories.
Cool. Another question is, do you have any tips when you're anthropomorphizing animals with realistic hands and human-like eyes without making it like too cartoony?
Oh yeah. Well, a lot of it is in how the animal behaves. So you can have a very realistic animal, like was the raccoon in Guardians.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a pretty realistic raccoon, and he doesn't really have those, anime eyes. So, but he's acting like a little person. He's acting very much like a human being. I mean, I hope real raccoons don't go around with weapons, for example. That would be rather frightening. So they're using a realistic animal model, animal body, but making it behave like a person. So you can certainly do that. And you can do that in 2D animation as well. It's all in how the animal is behaving, and of course, what is the voice of the actor. That has a lot to do with it too.
Indeed, yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
we have some more. Okay. These actually, I was curious when you were going through these. So obviously, when you're working with George Lucas, maybe those character names are already assigned. But how does that work for you? Like when you are creating character names, what is your process for that?
Okay, so when you're asking what goes through my mind when I'm creating a character.
Maybe like how do you decide on a name?
The name of a character. Well, sometimes I get to decide on the name, but most usually the character is already named for me because that's more a function of the director or the script writer or whoever originated the story. Once in a while, like in a huge production, like Star Wars or something like that, where there's tons of characters, you might say, "Hey, what do you think of this? I've been calling this creature this." And then that's up to the director saying, "Well, I kind of like that." Or he could say, "Well, I actually had another name in mind." The characters from Star Wars, and George named most of those. He named most of those characters. He has a very good sense of characters, that names that match the character. In the same sense, how Charles Dickens was able to name, I mean, Ebenezer Scrooge, that just describes that character so well. Or Fezziwig. I mean, you just get these images when you hear those names, or Miss Havisham. So George Lucas has a real talent, the same kind of talent that I think Dickens had for being able to come up with very evocative names. I don't have that talent necessarily.
Interesting. Okay, well, I think there's few enough of us left that if you guys have more questions, then feel free to just unmute and ask them. And Clarissa, I know you wanted to chat a little bit.
Yeah, one of my questions was the way that you keep drawing cartoony. Do you find it important when you're making a new creature to like switch between cartoon and realistic? Does that help you like decide if your design is working well?
Yeah. When you have, say, for example, if I'm going to create a rabbit character, it helps me to have, say, photo reference of rabbits around me at my drawing board because they're inspirational. And then I might notice something about the real rabbit that, I'm going to add that little thingy into the caricature or the character of the exaggerated or the cartoony rabbit. So yeah, and that's how Disney worked when they did Bambi back in 1939. It's a beautiful motion picture, and the deer are pretty realistic, except that when you come straight down to the Bambi as a fawn, he's fairly cartoony, although he moves just like a real deer. But they had actual deer in the set for the artists to draw from, and so they were drawing the character Bambi, but always had real fawns and real adult deer as well, at easy access to be able to observe. And so, yeah, you do strike that balance absolutely in especially in high-end productions.
What's been your favorite project to work on?
Oh my goodness. Well, I've got two favorite projects. I think, and I loved all of them really. I've been fortunate never to have worked on a project I didn't have fun with or learn from. I loved working on Brother Bear. I have the friendships that were established from that production have absolutely endured from that time. That was what, 25 years ago, my gosh. My supervisor was Aaron Blair, and he's a fantastic artist and a magnificent wildlife artist as well. And we've been friends since that, and other people as well at Disney. And that was just an enchanting experience. My other favorite project that I worked on was actually my own. That was the Katuran Odyssey, and that was a chance for me to do my own world building. And I'm so thrilled when that book was republished last year, and so that was really happy. And we've got some little irons in the fire regarding that particular book, so hopefully those will come to pass. I can't talk too much about that right now, but we'll see.
That's so exciting. Oh my goodness.
That's awesome.
That's a good sign when you can't talk about something in the film industry.
It is for
Being a creator.
It's things can happen or not happen. It's the nature of the beast, but at least I'd rather have at least something going on. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a quick question about when you said when you're drawing a rabbit, you like to have pictures around, like provide information. Do you ever take field trips to go like in person look at some of these animals?
Yeah, and it's particularly I did obviously pre-COVID. But for example, I see horses every day because I have two horses. But yeah, you can go to the zoo, which is great. Or if you're near a wildlife area like you guys are, there's that. But there's also a really handy one of the things that you can do also is if you live in a city or you're not able to get to a zoo or it's rainy, the weather is horrible or something. You can go to museums or you can go to a Petco. Petcos are great because it's inside. The animals are well cared for, and they've got quite a variety. They've got small mammals. They have birds. There's reptiles, amphibians, fish, and even insects. And they're right there. They're close to you. You can see them, and they're usually not hiding too much. And that's a wonderful place to go. So you can go there and draw, and then buy a magazine on the way out. They've got wonderful variety of magazines that have tons of animal photographs, which are great for reference. Even dogs, cats, rabbits, birds. It's a great resource, and not enough people, I think, as artists, take advantage of that. So, go there and sketch. You can do some photographs of the animals. You can, again, buy a toy for your kitty if you have a kitty, or buy a magazine for reference. It's a nice resource. If you can't get it all, you're on a deadline. Of course, there's always the internet. You can grab images, but even handier, you can go on YouTube or access video from PBS. You can pause, play, like say it's from a David Attenborough Planet Earth series. like you can pause a frame and draw from that frame and then let it go a little bit more. And that way you can kind of get a feel for the actual animals more than just looking at a bunch of pictures, because a lot of times the photographs, where's the foot? The foot's hiding in the water, or I only see this view of the face. But when you say, okay, let's look at some video of the giraffe or the okapi or the hippopotamus, you can freeze the frame and okay, so that's a really good help. I mean, so take advantage of digital technology.
Another question I have is, how did you get into this career? Because like I've been looking at your artwork for years. You're like one of my top models for art, and I'm currently studying to do scientific illustration. And so I was wondering how you get more like into that creature design aspect.
Well, that's interesting that you should say that, because when I was a young person, that is what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a scientific illustrator. I wanted to work for clients like National Geographic, Scientific American, Smithsonian. I wanted to do things for museums and zoos. And so that was on my track. And so I majored in vertebrate zoology with the intent of doing that. And while I still had a little college money left over, and this was a long time ago. This was like in the 80s when college was not as anywhere expensive as it is nowadays. And imagine having money left over from college. I mean, that's like, what? That doesn't happen. But back then, that was actual reality. So I took a couple semesters at couple art schools. I just wanted to get some more contacts and get a little more illustration training as far as the business went and such. And in order to get a bachelor's degree from one of the schools, I had one of the requirements was to participate in a senior show, which I did. And was wildlife illustration, was more natural history type illustration that as far as subject matter went. And this was in the Bay Area. It was a art school in San Francisco. This is the Academy of Art University. And I got a call. Actually, it was my advisor called me, had to come to her office, and she said, Lucasfilm is interested in you. Because a couple of their art directors from Lucasfilm, which is located in the San Francisco Bay Area, saw my animal artwork. And they said, we want to hire you for creature design, because I knew the anatomy. And so the scientific nature of that is what got me into the industry, the entertainment industry. It wasn't because I had a portfolio of space aliens, because I didn't. It was because I understood the anatomy, and that's what they cared about. If you understand animal anatomy, then creature design should be a piece of cake. And and it's true, because a tiger will always tell you how incorrectly you draw it, right? A dragon, not so much. I mean, right. Who's to say you drew an incorrect dragon? I mean, there aren't any dragons flying around saying, you drew me wrong. See, here I am in real life.
Yeah.
So, drawing a tiger or a horse or a giraffe needs a lot more dedication and concentration than say, oh, I'm just going to draw, this blippity blop. So, and I do a lot of natural history illustration. My current job right now I'm working on is a job for Scientific American. So I've been able to do both. My latest book, Flying Monsters, the author is a paleontologist. I've done lots of paleo reconstructions, and I have done things for zoos and such. And one of my clients I worked for was the World Wildlife Fund. So you can do it. You can do all of that. You don't have to restrict yourself. If you understand human and animal and anatomy and how it works together and love that, there's no reason why you can't do that. And I was just in the right place at the right time. And that's how that happened.
Awesome. Yeah.
So cool.
Yeah. yeah, I'm doing a similar the DIS project that Atticus is in right now, and so I'm doing paleontology, biology, and studio art as like a major.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sounds like just a dream major to me. You know, that sounds like something that I would be wanting to do if I was in the same place in life that you're where you are. That sounds like, yeah, that sounds awesome.
Clarissa was the one who gave us the idea to bring you to Honors Presents.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm
Yeah.
very, very happy to be here. I'm very appreciative.
Yeah,
Thank you.
there was a convention I went to and I found some of your like creature design books and I got them. It's like, oh my gosh, these are amazing. And like started looking at all your artwork and like I'd gotten this Copic like art book and it had a drawing in there and I was like, this looks like Terrell's, and it ended up in your little presentation.
Oh.
And so it was like, oh, I actually am like recognizing your art style.
Well, thank you. It's one thing that's really important for any artist, any illustrator, is to have your own voice, so that, well, practical reasons, so an art director can tell you apart. But just for your own sake, we've my peers and I, and instructors also, have noticed over the years a tendency of art students, very hardworking art students, to draw like each other or how they think they're supposed to draw. So, well, this is because they've grown up on so much media, so they'll draw just like how they think Disney wants them to draw, or DreamWorks wants them to draw, and so all their designs or their lions all start to look alike. Oh, like this looks like a variation on Simba, and this is like Simba, and this, but it looks like one artist drew them, and there's like thousands of people drawing this way, and that's not good, because Disney will hire a conceptual artist based on their voice. What can you contribute to the movie so that the movie doesn't look like the last movie we just did? And obviously there is some consistency in the production of any studio, but Disney hired me for Brother Bear because of what I could contribute to the look and feel of that particular movie, and they would hire you because of the particular qualities in your artwork that they see. Oh, I love the way that Clarissa draws in this manner, and maybe we can get a little bit of that into our film somewhere along the line, and kind of translates over. And so it's really important to be able to do that, and also it shows versatility, because a client will want to know, well, I know you can draw Simba, but can you draw another kind of lion? Oh no, I can only draw Simba. That's all I know. See what I mean? And I like Simba. Simba's a beautiful design, but it only works in The Lion King.
Completely. I'm curious, do you have like, if you were to give yourself, like, if there was to be some future project, what would be like the next great thing that you would choose to work on?
Well, the sequel to Katura, I think. I love to do that. I do have a sequel to that. It's all storyboarded out, and so that does exist. But there's a real cool project that the author of Flying Monsters, paleontologist Michael Habib, some of you may have heard of him. He just pitched an idea to me that would be right up my alley, because it has to do with horses.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, and I can't say more.
Right, yeah.
But we're going to pitch
that's so exciting, then.
We're going to pitch it to our publisher and see what happens. I think that the publisher will like that, because one thing I do know is that horses are popular animals. Every Disney princess has one. You didn't start out with one. Snow White has one now too.
Yep.
And of course, there's the dire horses in Avatar, and now there's horse creatures in Star Wars, and horses that are very interesting in that they are the animal that appears the most in motion pictures, and they are the animal that appears the most in animation, and they are the animals that appear most in art history. The horses, more than any other animal,
Yeah.
at least in Western art history. Native Americans didn't have them until later, but once the Native Americans got hold of horses, horses in so many ways changed their lives, especially the plains. Indians changed their religion. So there's something about horses that are ever popular.